This video is about the circular flow model. And circular flow models have either 2, 3, or 4 sectors. We're going to work with a 2-sector circular flow. And the 2 sectors, the 2 parts, are going to be the firms and the households. In a 3-sector model, we would add government. In a 4-sector model, we would add international, the rest of the world. So our 2 sectors are firms. Firms, that's just the economics way of saying businesses, business firm. And what do firms do? Firms take inputs and they combine them and then turn them into output. So inputs turned into output. And why would a business do that? The goal is to make a profit. So you may remember the movie Chicken Run. Chickens in, chicken pies out. So why do they make chicken pies? So they can sell them and make a profit. They sell the chicken pies for more than they spend on the chickens and the labor and the machinery. Okay? Actually, there's a lot of economics in that movie. And so we've got the other sectors, the households. Now the households are the people. All the people in the society belong to households. When we say households, we're saying the people in the society. And the people in our model own all of the inputs and the resources. Remember inputs, resources? Those are land, labor, capital, machinery, and entrepreneurial ability. So every piece of land, all of the human labor, all of the capital, all the entrepreneurship is ultimately owned by some person. In a model that had the government, we could have the government owning things, but not here. We don't have a government. Okay? So economic activity takes place when the households, so the people, make their resources, so for example, make their labor available to firms in exchange for compensation. So you make your labor available to, say, McDonald's in exchange for a paycheck for compensation. And then what will you do with that pay? The people then take that compensation, and what do? They buy. And what do they buy? The products and services that were produced by the firms using the household's resources. Okay? And so in the end, the households, they started off owning resources and they end up getting goods and services. So I don't especially want my own labor. I'd rather have maybe a nice computer. And so what I do is I offer my labor to a business. The business hires me, they pay me, and then I go and I buy a computer. And so that's what we're all doing. We're taking the labor and the other resources that we own, and for most of us, our key resource is labor, and we offer to let other people use it in exchange for pay, and we're motivated to do that so we can go out and buy things. Okay, so I'm going to pause at that point. Now in our 2-sector model, there are 2 markets. Markets are places where buyers and sellers come together. It doesn't have to be a physical place, although it could be like the farmer's market, but it could be online. It could be very, very informal. And so we have markets for goods, products, and services. Services are things that are produced, but they don't have a physical component, such as education, and that would be like going to the dentist, and the dentist looks at your teeth, so that would be a service, a medical service. And then we have markets for factors of production. So factors factors are the same as resources and are the same as input. So if I say factors, if I say resources, if I say inputs, you think the same thing. Okay? And so remember, the factors of production are land, natural resources, human labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And we'll see that in the next slide. So two markets. We'll have a place where goods and services are sold, and we'll have a place where inputs are sold, bought and sold. So bought and sold the goods. And so who's going to sell the goods? It'll be the firms. So up here we'll just say the firms sell. The firms sell. And who buys? The household buys. In the market for factors of production, the firms buy and the households, because they own all the inputs, they sell or supply. Okay. Now let's take a little closer look at the factors of production. I've already talked about them, and I think you're already comfortable with this, but just to be sure. So this is factors of production, which we could also call inputs, and we could also call resources. Okay, so the labels are land, and land means all available natural resources. So at one time, land meant pretty much, land, farmland, because most of the output was from farms, but not anymore. So land is all natural resource. It would involve the sun and the wind and the water, as well as the minerals and the soil. Okay. In Switzerland, they produce about 70% of their electricity by water running down, hydro, in the mountains. So just gravity would come into play there. Okay, labor, this represents then human labor, and so it's the labor potential of the household. So as you get into more detail, it involves work ethic, it involves the health of the workers, but basically it just means the labor potential. So how much work could the people do? Capital, this is the one that's usually the least comfortable for people. In everyday usage, if I say capital, people, when they hear that, will think money, but it doesn't mean money. What it refers to here is things that are produced, goods, that means they're physical, goods that are produced, and then instead of being consumed by households, instead they're set aside, they go to firms, and then the firms use them to produce in the future. So with capital, the purpose is future production. So we produce a tractor. That's output then that's not going to be consumed by households, but instead it will go to firms, farms, and then those farms will produce corn or wheat or whatever it is in the future. And so we might produce factories, we might produce train engines, we might produce aircraft, we might produce computers to be used by businesses. Those are all capital. And so with capital, think factories and equipment. So if you hear the word capital in our context, then imagine factories. Okay, so it's the equipment, the factories and equipment that firms use when they produce their product. A football stadium like Lambeau in Green Bay, that's capital. In order for the Packers, who are a firm, they produce a service, entertainment. In order for them to produce their games, they use a stadium, and so the stadium is part of their capital. And then entrepreneurship, this is the ability to anticipate what people want, to look at the population and say, those people would be willing to buy whatever, and then entrepreneurs don't just have that vision. There are people who have that vision, but they can't make it happen. Entrepreneurs can also make it happen. And so, Steve, I don't know where the jobs went to. Maybe the next slide. But Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs from Apple, he was a great entrepreneur. He anticipated what people wanted. He understood that with computers, they wanted good design, and he was visionary, but then he also could make the companies produce high quality products. So he was really, really good. Okay, so when we talk about the inputs, we're talking about the land, the natural resources, the human labor, the machinery, the equipment, and then that entrepreneurial ability that often the managers will bring in. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to try to draw this. And I better pick a color that'll stand out. So I'm going to label this box H, so that'll stand for our households. This box will be F, so it'll stand for the firms. This will be the market. And I'll just put G and S for goods and services. And then this will be the market. Well, that wasn't very good. For resources. Okay, so we start off now. And the households have the ownership of all the inputs. But they don't want inputs. They want goods and services. So they take those inputs and they offer them for sale in the market for resources. So you take your labor and you offer it for sale. Maybe that means going door to door and filling in applications. Maybe that means going online. Maybe it means going to the career center. Maybe it means hiring a headhunter to help you. Having an agent. If you're an actor, then you maybe are an actress. You have an agent who tries to then find work for you in film. Okay? And so that's being supplied. And then who would buy? Who would be interested in those resources? It's the firms. And so the labor or the other resources go from the households. There's this market. Some firm says, hey, I want that you have. And so the resources go to the firm. The firm then combine different resources together, some machines, some equipment, some workers, and some natural resources and so on, and then produces goods and services. And offers the goods and services for sale. And who's going to buy those goods and services? Those goods and services are going to be bought by the households. And so you see that flow, and we call this the real flow because it's, the actual labor, the actual natural resources and so on that are being sold and bought by the firms. And then these are real goods, physical goods and real services that are being offered for sale in the market and that are being then purchased and consumed by the households. In order for that to happen, though, in our economy, we have an advanced economy, so it's a money economy. I'll use green for money. So what happens is that the firms, they pay, right? So the firms pay like wages or rents or whatever it is. And then that's income. It's amazing how hard this is, this marker. You know, I was a kid and I had bad penmanship. I never thought it would come back to haunt me like this. Okay. And then what do they do with that income? They spend it. So that's spending. And then for the firm, that's the sales revenue. And if the sales revenue is enough to cover their costs, then the firms are happy to continue. And so we have this flow then of money going around on the outside. Firms pay the workers get the income, they spend the income, and it goes back to the firms in the form of sales. Okay? So this is the simple circular flow. The final thing I'd like to just point out to you is the importance of confidence in the economy and thinking about it in terms of the circular flow. If the households are confident, if households feel confident, then when they receive income, they're going to spend it. So the households will spend. The firms then receive the money that the households spend. That gives them an incentive to go and hire, buy more inputs from the households, which again then would put money into the hands of the households. So the households go out and spend, the businesses get that money, the businesses then hire more workers, and that then sends money to the households, who then take the money and spend it again. So when things are good, people have an incentive to spend because we want goods and services, and so the firms are happy to produce, and in order to produce they need to hire workers, and the economy just hums right along, and it really does very well. But if confidence is low, as it has been in the past few years, then households, and it's perfectly reasonable, they hold back. You know, if I'm thinking I'm sure to get summer school work, then we're going to spend differently if I think, you know, there may not be any summer school income. And if you think maybe you might be losing your job, then you're not going to go out and spend. You're going to try to be as careful as possible. And I'll bet some of you, you know, your parents have been saying over the past 4 or 5 years, we really have to cut back, we really have to be careful. I mean, that's what I'm saying to my children. And so, other side of it though is that if the Kolbs and if your family aren't spending as much, then the firms receive less income. They're not selling as many products. And so it makes sense that what they would do then is they would cut back on the number of workers. I mean, if I'm not buying cars, then GM is going to lay off workers. And then if GM lays off workers, then the households have less income to spend, and so the auto workers don't buy swimming pools, and so the swimming pool workers, some of them get laid off. And so then the economy can spiral down. So when it's up, it's really up, and when it's down, it's really down. And so that's one of the great weaknesses of the type of system that we have. It tends to a boom or bust. And so there are some people who feel then that if we brought in a government sector, and the idea would be that the government, when times are booming, they would try to slow it down, primarily with higher taxes. And then if the economy is down, what they would try to do is ignite it, you know, get it going with, say, stimulus spending and maybe lower taxes. And so the government then becomes sort of a stabilizing force. So Democrats say, yes, that's the way to go. We need to have a government that intervenes in the economy. Republicans tend to say no. The Republicans say the government, well intended, is just going to mess things up. It ultimately comes down to the business sector and the households to make the decision. They know what's best for them. Get the government out. I don't have the answer for you, but in November, with the elections, then you get to signal how you feel. If you feel there's a big role for government, probably you'll vote for the Democrats. If you think that government should be small and decisions should be made by the households and the firms, then you'll tend to vote Republican. Again, your call. Okay, thanks.